And welcome back as we continue our discussion about Eskom and the roadmap released yesterday by Minister Pravin Gordhan, and in conversation with Chris Yelland and Zwelinzima Vavi as we continue. Let's just get back to that roadmap and let's talk about the funding, because there has been mixed reaction to the roadmap as a whole, but particularly about the funding question as to how are we going to fund these changes anyway, and whatever else needs to be paid for at Eskom as we stand. Chris?
Yeah, so this plan is necessary, but it's not sufficient. It is absolutely important to give the financial community and lenders the assurance that there is actually a plan, and there is a credible plan on the table. But that's not enough. The next thing that's got to happen today is that the Minister of Finance has got to give clarity about this debt position and how it's going to be serviced. There is going to have to be a bailout of one form or another, because at the moment Eskom's net operating revenue is not even covering half of its debt service commitments. So debt has to be reduced, and that's going to be in the form of a bailout in one form or another. There are different models on the table that's going to hopefully be clarified today. But this plan does not solve the short-term problems. The short-term problems are essentially financial and operational. That means load shedding. And the long-term plan is just that. It's a 10-year plan. It's not going to solve the short-term issues. For that is going to need crisis management. And we're going to hear today how the financial issues are going to be addressed. But one way or another, things cannot continue as they are. It's not business as usual. We have to start on this road. If we don't start now, we'll never reach the end state that we desire.
Mr. Vavi?
Sakina, there is and there was a discussion. I don't know what this will mean to that discussion. There is a discussion that is taking place internally at Eskom. That is a discussion between management, the trade unions, which should involve the communities, in particular of Mpumalanga, who are bound to be affected by any form of restructuring of Eskom one way or another. What we distaste is that the minister sidelines that whole discussion, which offers real solutions to the crisis of Eskom. You were saying that we must put solutions. We are putting solutions as to how we can save the situation, including of making Eskom go back to the days when it was providing electricity cheaply, efficiently, without the crisis of load shedding that have created such a havoc in the economy. You sideline that process because it does not suit your interest ideologically.
Mr. Vavi, it's in the plan.
The
energy transition is in the plan.
The transition, you sideline that process. You say to workers and communities, your views do not matter. What matters is the views of the World Bank and the conservative economists like Chris, who now must embrace a new strategy to break down Eskom in order to bring in private players into provision of what we regard as a public good. Electricity, in our view, energy, in our view, is a public good, like public education, like providing prisons, like providing justice, like providing healthcare. It's a public good that must be provided by a caring government that knows that once you bring in the private players to bring in the logic of profit generation and maximization, that will eventually exclude the poor majority who can't pay, which is we believe this plan is a roadmap actually towards not only breaking up of Eskom, but towards privatization.
All right. We don't have the time this morning to unpack that any further. But what I want to know from you, from a governance perspective, as we're out of time, do we have the right people in place? Do we have the requisite skill set to move us somewhere along that path so that we can get to the promised land over the next 10 years, Chris?
From a governance point of view, let's look at the big picture. The big picture is that we have a monopoly generation, transmission, distribution entity that generates something like 95% of all the electricity in South Africa, and this monopoly is failing. We also have a heavy overdependence, something like 80% on coal as our primary energy source. And this is putting the entire country at risk. The fact that all our eggs are in the Eskom basket and all our eggs are in the coal basket. The answer from a governance perspective is to diversify. Diversify Eskom so that we have a diversified energy sector, which includes government, which includes former Eskom generators, which includes public-private partnerships, which includes independent power producers, municipal electricity distributors, and commercial and industrial organizations that have own generation on their own sites. This is a highly diversified energy sector. This is the vision that is pointed out in this plan. And the other vision that is also pointed out in the Integrated Resource Plan for Electricity is to diversify away from coal. That doesn't mean to say coal is going to disappear, not at all. But new generation is not going to be coal. Coal is going to be decommissioned, and new generation is going to come from wind, solar PV, hydro, gas, battery energy storage. We need to reduce coal in the mix in order to have a more diversified energy sector and a more diversified Eskom. That's how you manage risk, by increasing diversity. You cannot put all your eggs in the Eskom basket. You cannot put all your eggs in coal.
Final word on governance.
That model of monopoly to provide a public good have served South Africa's manufacturing interest
in the
for
past.
70
in the
years,
past,
until we elected a government that doesn't care about what is really in the public interest or public good, which is now milking and destroying a world-leading company to a debt-ridden company that we're now speaking about. We've got to start there. So you talk about governance. In our view, this government will never serve the interest of the greater majority of its citizens again. We need to do something about that. And secondly, this minister have proven beyond any doubt that him and the acting CEO, acting chairperson, acting service provider have no clue of how to respond to the crisis at hand, and frankly, all of them must go. And they must be replaced by hopefully somebody who knows Eskom in and out from his own or her own internal experience, capable of assembling a board of people who knows the institution that can take us into a direction where Eskom will be revived, where it can again provide us with cheap electricity, where it can be again efficient, and where it again can have a clear interest of the manufacturing and industrialization interest of South Africa. And that's all that we need. And we can talk about the details, but we have been failed here, and people are not being held accountable for failing such a institution as critical, as important as Eskom have been to the South Africa's economy.
Well, thank you so much to Chris Yelland, who is, of course, the Managing Director of Energize Magazine and the General Secretary of the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU, Zwelinzima Vavi.